Ladies and gentlemen, the discussion is about to begin. People are being called upon the telephones.
Am I allowed to speak words?
Yes, you may speak your mind, as long as it's
Alright,
within the
so
bounds of
Protoss is
TOS.
absolutely.
Gemini coming in hot.
Hi.
We have Gemini. We have Maxtu. We have brownbear. Welcome. If any of you want to make an elevator speech about what you do, that would be cool. I guess I can go first as the streamer. In case you guys put this on your YouTube channel or whatever, or link people here, my name is Neuro. I'm known as the mindset and mentality guy in the StarCraft scene. I was inspired by players like Idra, who were held back by their mentality, to help people deal with the emotional roller coaster that is StarCraft, focus on taking responsibility for their mistakes and improving over time, and being just general, wholesome, respectful people. Okay, Gemini, what's your deal? Why are you here? What do you do?
Hi, I'm Gemini. I shitpost about I'm just kidding. Well, I do that, but no, yeah, I'm a GM Protoss. I've been playing for forever, since the beginning of Wings Beta. I make a bunch of educational Protoss stuff, guides, wall-off guides, YouTube videos, stuff like that. I stream a little bit. But yeah, I like to talk about StarCraft. Boom, that's why I'm here.
Fantastic. Maxu, what's up? What's your story?
Hey, I'm Max. So I'm a Bronze League Terran who like to post on my little blog, write up a Terran shit, and mask it with some rational thoughts.
Sweet action. Bronze League hero. And Brown Bear, what is up?
Hey, I'm brownbear. I'm a former competitive Age of Empires player. I started playing StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void. I've been writing about the game's design for about 3 years on my blog and my YouTube channel. I've done a couple of longer, in-depth pieces on the game's competitive multiplayer, as well as on its cooperative side.
Awesome. And there are 2 articles that we have linked here in the articles command by Max and Brown Bear. I don't know why it's not showing up, but there should be a working command for that. Is it case sensitive, these commands? That's silly. Or maybe the bot just chose this moment of all times to die. Well, I wanted to start out with a little bit of kind of my personal perspective on balance throughout Legacy of the Void. I wasn't competitive in Wings. I just four-gated people sometimes. And in Heart of the Swarm, I was on that road to GM thing. But with Legacy of the Void, one of the things that really stands out to me is the stages of changes and how balanced or imbalanced the game has been over time. And for some perspective on it, whenever they have a new expansion, they add a bunch of things and shake up the game a lot, and that tends to be its least balanced state. I remember some periods of crushing sadness in the Legacy of the Void beta, when they were automating injects, giving us 2 larvae. Whenever they gave damage on the Zealot charge, that was totally broken. Protoss could just make Zealots and kill you. And then the Adept was a unit that took a lot of time to work out. So relative to then, just so we have some perspective on balance, the game is in my opinion, a very good spot. It's not perfectly balanced, and one of the things that makes balance really difficult as a concept is that the 3 races in StarCraft are different, and they're balanced asymmetrically. So it's not that they're all equally good at every different aspect. They have certain strengths and weaknesses. They have certain areas that are more or less forgiving. Gemini mentioning his wall-off guides. Sometimes I off-races Protoss, and it's a pretty silly way to lose, where you just have a single Zergling-wide slot in your wall and you instantly lose the game. So, StarCraft is a very fair and excellent 1v1 game, in my opinion. I was doing some classic WoW yesterday, and I was getting camped by someone who was like 20 levels above me. And that really gives you a perspective on very unfair situations. So, all things considered for the state of StarCraft balance over its history, the game is in a pretty good spot, and it's been a while since we've had a community update, and a lot of people have been really wanting to hear from the balance design team. The post itself was super well written. I really like that they basically articulated that they understand where the community is coming from, and you can tell that they read our shit posts and our tweets and things like that. Even if they don't change everything that we talk about, they addressed a lot of stuff, which I was really impressed by. So we can probably just go through this here, go through the changes one at a time. I can pull those up on the screen, unless there was anything else you guys wanted to talk about before we dive into that.
Time to re. That's all I got.
Yeah, well, I mean, the good thing you can grab from that is that I think it's okay to like banter and joke about how the different races are strong and stuff, and I think the Blizzard balance design team knows that. Like, it's kind of fun to joke about it and make meme posts and things like that. So having a bit of fun is very fair play, in my opinion, as long as we're respectful about it.
We'll be serious. Don't worry, guys. Don't worry.
Super serious, 100%.
Easy.
All right, change number 1 for Terran. The stim pack upgrade research duration was decreased from 121 to 100 seconds. Now, I believe I did see in Max's article you were talking about this some, right? And you were saying that a lot of different upgrades have been changed to 100 seconds.
I just thought it's kind of arbitrary. Like, it's a magical number, but why 100? Like, you know.
Yeah, so the thing with this, stim takes a pretty long time relative to other upgrades that I've noticed. A limiting factor here is the number of units you can have that will benefit from stim early on. So a build that Terrans did pretty much every single game against Zerg for almost an entire year was 2-1-1. That's 2 medivacs filled with Marines, and then stim kicks in, and they try to pressure, clear creep, things like that. That can hit a little bit earlier. I did some practice games against Uppetry. Jason was saying that he thinks that this stim change is going to be better for going for a tech opening, like Hellion Banshee or Hellion Battlecruiser or something that involves a little bit of aggression, and then hitting a Marine tank follow-up. And it also means that you can hit your stim and combat shield combination earlier in the game. How does this relate to Protoss versus Terran, do you think, Gemini?
Honestly, I don't really feel like it's going to do that much in PvT because, like we said, like what the issue was originally with 2-1-1, people were saying how, you know, it's gated by medevacs, right? Like, medevacs are the thing that are determining whether the push hits on time or not, because stim finishes on the way over. But they, Jason, Uppetry, they kind of found out that you can hit about like 15 seconds earlier or so if you get stim a little bit later in favor of a faster starport. But in PvT, I don't really feel like that's something that's going to come into effect too much, just because there's not really many builds that actually rely on stim other than like a 3-Rax. And if you're hitting 21 seconds earlier with the stim timing, that just means that you have one less round of units to hit with it too. So it's like, is that actually a trade-off that's going to make it so that way 3-Raxes are suddenly very strong and impossible to hold? I really don't think so whatsoever. I feel like batteries are still fine. If you scout well enough, you'll have stuff prepared. I don't really see this being something that's going to completely break PvT in no way whatsoever. It does kind of just help to make it so that way, like, for blink openings, you can't have you have a smaller window where stim gets denied by blink or something. Again, it's easier to do those transitional things off of 1-1-1, so that way you don't get stuck without stim for eternity. That's kind of what I expect it to be, and that's also kind of what I saw you Thermal talking very briefly about in a tweet or so when it was first put up. So that's kind of that's really all I expect to see out of it in PvT, to be honest.
Cool. Brownbear, did you have any thoughts on the stim? I saw that was in your title of your article. Stim pack is a good upgrade.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to do is try to differentiate between an opener and a build. So like and Max has a really good article on this. But the way I think about it is like an opener is a set of steps you take to your first engagement with your opponent. And a build is like a predetermined set of steps that you follow, potentially like all the way to 200 supply or beyond that, basically to the end of your race's technology tree. And I think a lot of the discussion around the stim pack buff has talked about how it affects openers. And I don't necessarily agree that it doesn't affect openers that much, but I think it's correct that like it won't break the game at all. Where my concern with it comes in is with build orders. And so like a really classic better bread and butter build in TVZ is you open with Hellions, and then you build your third CC, and then you get a Banshee out, and the Banshee can defend against Roach timings, or it can go harass and stuff. And this is followed up by a 6-minute 30-second timing attack with stim and combat shield and +1/+1. And it's a really strong build. And again, the build goes beyond this all the way to 200 supply, but that 6-minute 30-second timing attack is very important. And it's true that stim is not a bottleneck to that build if you execute it perfectly. But because the timing is so tight, there's a lot of counterplay opportunity for the Zerg player to create trouble for the Terran player, either again with Roach timings, with Ling run bys. Like really any amount of damage screws up the timing of that attack. Whereas if you give the Terran player more slack, you potentially allow them, like you basically make it so the Zerg player can do some damage and it won't affect the Terran. It just gives the Terran more slack to make mistakes. And so I think that will have more impact than maybe people are thinking. And I think that's one of the reasons why I personally consider it to be a risky change and not a particularly good change.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by it. I think 2-on-1 as an opening build, it did get a little bit tiresome, but we're kind of to the point now where from the Zerg perspective, I don't really see it that often. The opening you're talking about is pretty interesting. One of the questions that Blizzard has been trying to work on for a long time is the balance between the strength of a mech mid-game versus a bio mid-game. And bio play, I think, tends to be a little bit more mechanically intensive. Mech play is a little bit more positional, but it does feel like there's a pretty healthy mixture of mech and bio, at least in the Terran versus Zerg matchup. So I'm kind of interested to see if this shifts the balance more in favor of a bio mid game because it is a little bit on the stronger side. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see where these things go. I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's pretty important to note this is not a patch notes post. This is a community update that has proposed changes that will be put into a test format where we can test it for a period of time, and then they're going to decide what's going to go in. So none of these changes are final. This is just the starting point, and they did say that they're going to have 2 waves of changes. So this is wave number 1. Wave number 2 has not been announced yet.
Oh, did they actually say that that's 100% happening no matter what?
I don't think there was a guarantee on it, but that's the
Okay.
initial idea.
I thought it was like, if these changes don't seem good, then we'll show you the other ones, which I find interesting, but regardless.
Mm-hmm.
So regarding the Steam thing, right? There's something that I really want to bring up, and that is like Mag in TVZ is getting more and more popular. Right, even in PvP, Mag is not as good as Bio, but in recent games we see more Mag as well. And one of the things right now in a meta game for Terran builds, right? Terran tend to use what I like to call the ambiguous builds. So I go with expansion, I go 1-1-1, I go with Mag, and even TY recently showed that I just go straight to Sky. And it's usually all this 1-1 build that if you transition to Bio, problem. Because when you transition, you have and that's a time whereby the opponent can do whatever they want, whether it's Protoss, whether you're Zerg. That is one of the things that this Steam upgrade change is going to affect. Whereby all this tech build early on, like 1-1-1, you can make a marine tank push, then go to Mag, go to Bio. And I think that itself, right, is going to shape up to be like the transition to be a lot smoother. And Mag is no longer the kind of the more smoother transition compared to the past. Right? So if this thing change, it's a lot smoother in a sense.
Yeah, so going from a tech opening into a bio isn't going to be quite as clunky as it was before. That's one of the things that makes Terran pretty unique, is you are dependent on add-ons, and your add-ons oftentimes hold a lot of really important progress for your tech path. There were some people I saw commenting on how getting the stim upgrade killed was basically a game-ending move, when the tech lab is a very fragile piece of equipment in the Terran infrastructure. Maybe that was in your article, actually, that I saw that. I'm not sure. But that is something that's pretty noteworthy that makes Terran unique compared to Zerg and Protoss, is they have some of their precious tech and the things that they specialize into that are on those very vulnerable structures. So yeah, getting that done faster makes it more secure. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question: Do you feel like if this stim timing or if this stim change goes through, are any like bio mech or like bio into late game mech or like mech into late game bio styles are potentially going to become more popular due to the fact that you can more easily transition, or is it way past the? Is that, do you need way more than just stim to do that? Because obviously you need the infrastructure of, you know, all the barracks or all the extra factories and stuff like that. Does that change anything, do you think?
Well, the thing that I've noticed with Terran players who are quite strong that I play against, and this is speaking from not a pro level but an AGM level, lol, is a strong Terran will think about how to spend their gas at the third base, and sometimes that means dropping a second factory, getting double the tank production, or having double Thor production or something like that. Just getting more mech beefy units out to supplement their bio, and then having Liberators on top, so that as the game progresses, there are often less and less Marine Marauder Medivac, and you have more of those mech units. So it is useful, I think, for players to understand that shift and how you can have a mixture that makes sense based on how much money you're getting in and what kind of composition you're looking to build. You don't necessarily have to strictly have pure Marine Medivac Marauder mine or just straight up mech. You can have a little bit of a mixture of them, but that should be pretty mapped out from the build order stage in your progression from base to base.
It's a really good point, actually. Like it's a pretty common convergence point in a lot of Terran builds when you start transitioning to your fourth base. You build 3 more barracks and you build a second factory or a second starport, depending on what you're trying to do. I don't think that will lead like bio into mech, because I think the infrastructure and in particular the upgrades are too different. I guess I would be curious to see if it led to that convergence point being reached faster, but I would probably guess no, just based on the fact that you need to saturate your third, and that's kind of the bottleneck on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for people who are learning the game and trying to practice and improve, most of the problems are not going to be balance oriented. This is another like foundational concept for how Blizzard designs and balances StarCraft. It's not for the common player, it's for the pinnacle of performance. So they're balancing the game for the best players in the world to have the most fair competition, rather than helping you go from gold to platinum. Fortunately or unfortunately. I think most of the community likes that. It makes it feel like it's a hardcore game that isn't just pandering to people who want an easy experience and stuff like that. This is some tough stuff, so 1v1 ladder is going to be balanced for the best that people can achieve, rather than like what your average player is doing.
A recent Reddit post of mine would have uncovered a few of those that would disagree with that, but that's a different meme if you want to scroll through my Twitter to find that.
Nice. So the next change here is enhanced shockwaves. It's a ghost ability. So the ghost EMP round, what is it? The radius goes from 1.5 to 2, and the cost is 150. Research time is 79 seconds. Another seemingly arbitrary number. Why is it not 100 seconds? So, from my perspective, I did hear Jason talk about this. Ghosts are units that are quite strong. They're kind of like an anti-late game unit from my perspective against in the Terran versus Zerg matchup. They have that snipe, which is good against ultras and broodlords. EMP against infestors. They can nuke your bases in the late game. It's a good unit, but it's expensive and it's fragile. And Jason was saying in his reaction that having a larger radius also means that you have a longer range. So you can cast it from further away and still kind of chip away at some of the enemy's caster units. So this is a pretty nice buff to the Ghost. I have heard some people say that the Terran late game isn't as strong as it should be compared to Zerg. One of the really funny things about those late game discussions is I don't know what your guys' experiences with ladder games, but I don't really get into that many of those games. There are a ton of all-ins and cheeses on the ladder, and getting into those hyper late game scenarios is maybe a 1 in 20 kind of scenario, and usually someone getting into that is just really ahead. So it's hard to make a balanced assessment when someone just got to the late game a base up with 12 more workers and better upgrades. It's not a fair comparison. So
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's my experience as well, to be honest with you.
I think
And the
when
late-
you point out
go
the
ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
upgrade, right, regarding like the average players, I think basically this upgrade for non-pros would be like, you know, you're ahead, and this is more of like let's win more upgrade, you know.
mhm.
But for pro players, right, whereby as you said, it won't be like 1 in 20 games that it's going to go late game. As you see recent games, right, it happens a lot of time. So this upgrade be a lot more utilized in the sense. And how much does it affect the actual gameplay in late game? Probably quite a lot. The difference in size, especially when you have multiple goals, right, it matters. Plus itself, the time is not that important when it's that late in the game. So this itself, right, is kind of like directly buffing Terran's late game, and I'm not sure, based on recent games, right, whether that is justified.
So,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about
think it's,
TVP, but go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Go.
I just wanted to say, I think it's really interesting, Neuro. The thing you talked about with how, with respect to the fact that the game is balanced around the top level players, and I think ghosts are like the prime example of that philosophy being true. Because like when you watch like the very, very, very best Terran players in the world, they build ghosts very consistently. They use them very cost efficiently. It's a very, very strong unit that does not need to be buffed. But then when you look at like literally anyone but the best 3 Terran players in the world, it's just a waste of money. It's like a nightmare scenario when they build ghosts. They just get destroyed by banelings or something. So that's actually my concern about this particular change, is that I think it'll allow those top 3 Terran players to just be like too strong, whereas everyone else will love it. But I think it won't affect the balance in the right way.
Yeah, that's an aspect of how much attention a unit demands. A ghost is a very demanding unit in terms of how much you have to look at it, make sure it doesn't get rolled over by a bunch of enemy units. That would be opposed to something like a Thor, that basically, if anything goes into range of it, it just evaporates. You don't even have to look at it.
Yeah.
You wanted to talk about TVP, how this relates?
Yeah, I'm like, this is me coming from a player that is very bad versus players that are just very good defensively, right? Playing the super long, ridiculous macro games. But regardless, I feel like the mass ghost strats in general in super late game are already they're tough. Like it's memed that, you know, Protoss has the very overwhelming strength in late game PvT or whatever, but it's quite a dance to play versus players that do get a sizable ghost count up. And obviously this is just going to make it, you know, a little bit more favored towards the ghost in terms of the ghost High Templar dance, which is what they kind of also directly cited in the balance update. Um, the the thing now is that like Neuro was saying with what Jason had mentioned with the range, is the range of the splash makes it so it's effectively outranging a Templar's feedback and potentially even Storm now. It was already like that where the splash of EMP technically outranged feedback, but it was like very, very minute. But like now it's definitely considerable. So it'll just make the dance extremely difficult, or just more difficult, I guess, in general. And because of this, I feel like we're also going to be seeing a lot less Templar openings, because normally what we see is like, blink charge, double forge into whatchamacallit, into High Templar. And then you do the suicide storm drops or whatever, and that's it. I feel like that stuff still is going to potentially be used, but it'll definitely be more difficult because there's much more leeway for how many or for how far away you shoot the MPs from, right? So it'll be just a little bit easier. You can EMP the Warp Prism from farther away even. You'll be able to very easily. I don't know. I feel like it'll just be a little bit more easily done. But I think in general, Robo Bay openings might be a little bit more common now, especially if they do the Warp Prism nerf as well, because then people will be wanting to get the Prism upgrade anyway to do fast warp-in. So those two things coupled together, I think, will lead to a lot of Robo Bay openings comparatively.
Do you mean Colossus drop?
No.
Oh.
But, I mean, just going into Colossus.
I think another thing, like, Gemini has a very good point. Like, Protoss is going, if all the changes are going to go through, right? Protoss is going to rely a lot more on robotech. Just say Terran's Protoss, for example. So if Stim goes through, right? The normal 111 probably don't have that much of a difference impact, but it opens up the option whereby you just go expand and then you put 2 more racks, you get Stim, Combat Shield, and no Medivac, and you just attack with a bunch of bio. Right, that is an options. What happens, what do you do? Well, maybe 2 base Colossus is an option, for example, having delay Nexus. So like all this change it may really push Protoss to be more robo-oriented in their builds.
Yeah, design philosophy thing, too, that they try to keep an eye on is the frequency of certain tech paths and to try and create a really diverse set of choices for players. So one of the examples was moving the Ling drop play to Lair Tech. Protoss was basically forced to open Adept Oracle every game, otherwise you would just die to it, which reduced the variety a whole bunch, and it makes the early game really boring. So a lot of these changes are trying to basically make all of the different choices kind of equal strength in a way, which is pretty hard to do, but I think it's been getting better. You do have a greater mixture now in the Zerg versus Protoss matchup between Twilight openings, Robo openings, and Stargate openings. Just on a purely, I guess we're going to get to Prism eventually, so we don't need to get into that now.
Yeah, hold off on that. Don't worry. I'll get my soapbox ready, guys.
Oh, now we get to do the fun Zerg change.
Oh.
So for Zerg, Infested Terran rocket damage, which is the anti-air firing mode, the damage is decreased from 14 to 12. This was a really fun change. It's a way of addressing some people who are saying that the Zerg late game against Protoss is too strong. Personally, I just die to the timings that are between 44 to 60 probes of gateway units. So this is kind of a mysterious part of ZVP that I don't get to experience. Which, yeah, if they're nerfing a part of the game that I don't even experience, then, well, who cares? But, yeah, the thought process behind this, I believe, is that as the game gets later and later, it gets better and better to mass infestors because you have fungal, which is a large radius and a large range. You have neural parasite, where you can take the enemy's units. And you also bank up Infested Terran, which did get a change fairly recently where they benefit from upgrades again. So as the game goes longer and longer, Infestors get better and better, and you can potentially have 3/3 upgraded Infested Terran that can deal tons of damage, and they don't count for supply. It's just based on the energy of the Infestor. So I can see how hypothetically this is a good change. I think this situation probably happens more on the Europe ladder than the NA ladder or the KR ladder. They do tend to have a lot of those hyper late game, both players are being really defensive kind of scenarios. So that's kind of where I am on that one. Did anyone else have an opinion on this?
I do, but I'm curious if Brown Bear has anything on this and how, and just like late game ZVP in general, or just kind of late game interactions. I don't know if you have anything on this.
I wasn't that interested in this change or the carrier change. I was more interested in the Warp Prism change.
Nice. All right, cool. We're all building up to the warp. We're leaving the best for last at this point. This is perfect. Um, so for this change, I don't really think it's gonna do much at all, to be honest. Like the carrier, the kind of also the meme that goes along with this one also is the carrier interceptor research time or build time is slightly slower, and this is the attempted offsetting of the Prism nerf. Where we hear that ZVP late game is apparently tough. Let's try and make it a little bit easier for Protoss. I don't feel like it'll end up doing much, to be honest. However, again, late game is a scenario where there's much more it's interacting with each other than early game stuff, so it's a lot harder to theory craft on it. And to be honest, I was wrong when I said the very initial, like the first ever time that they made interceptors less money, I was like, that's not going to change shit. Are you kidding me? And then it ended up just making them broken for however long. So I don't know. I don't feel like it'll do anything, but I'm ready to be wrong. That's fine. But I feel like it's going to be hard to know until we watch the EU pros go at it, because they're the kind of the ZVP late game masterminds, I feel.
Yeah, I think a part of that too is oftentimes they're trying to go for that stage of the game, and they're very comfortable with that. A lot of players have the mindset where they would like to resolve the match as soon as possible. So
Yeah.
they don't really like that sort of split map starvation, who can take one more base and end up making more use of the map. It does take a good 20 to 40 minutes to do that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's a situation that doesn't come up too often. But again, it is part of the game, so it does deserve some attention. Is this the right change? Well, it seems like a pretty small one. We'll see.
Why use more unit when less unit do good?
2 base all-ins. All right, now the other change that we've stated that we're not super interested in. The carrier interceptor is actually the new bunker. I saw some memes about this. It's the thing that's been adjusted over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where it's like a tradition at this point. Like, they should just change it every patch just to give a nod that they're changing stuff.
Up 0.1 DPS minus 0.1 DPS every other patch.
So the
Yeah,
interceptor
the one-
build time is decreased from 11 seconds to 9 seconds. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I play a lot of team games, and obviously the game is not balanced around team games. But Blizzard does consider like what do low-level players do, and they try to make sure the game is fun for them. And the carrier, the change that Gemini mentioned, the reduction of mineral cost from 25 to 5 minerals, it was like a nightmare for team games. So I think that's one of the reasons that they try to avoid changing this unit too much. It's because even though the game is not balanced around team games, they don't want to make team games like unplayable.
Yeah,
Very dully
I
noted
thought
with the
that's-
smallest grain of salt I could ever pour out of my fucking salt canister.
I have noticed some posts about the carrier in the current state where it's almost faster to make a new carrier than to rebuild your interceptors.
Yeah, that was the meme when they first changed it out.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah.
It does, I guess, create some counterplay. A problem with the carrier, I think, was mainly against Zerg, where when it was in that most buffed state, you could basically just mass carriers and nothing else, and there was a point where
Yeah.
Zerg couldn't really do anything anymore.
The problem now is though that you can't do that, and we've realized that Tempest are not good enough against corruptors, and we've also noticed that Void Rays are not good enough against they're good against corruptors, but not to the point where it can then negate the Infinity infested Terran and fungal spam and whatnot. And then also coupled with the feedback nerf, making it so we can't kill infestors with feedback. We have to use Storm. Makes it very difficult with the tentacles,
Mhm.
whatever that's called, Neuro. So all that coupled together makes it a cry fest for a CVP late game. And that's why I don't think a 3-second, or no, 2-second decrease in build time for interceptors is going to make much of a difference.
Cool. And carriers against Terran, is that a thing? I've made them sometimes and they just die.
Versus mech, it is. I mean, carriers are already pretty decent versus mech until Thors are out. But I mean, carriers are just not good against Thors really, so that's just not really nothing's changing in that regard. But in the time period before they have anti-air out well enough, then yeah, you can use carriers, but it's not really an issue. Tempest are really the bigger threat in PvT.
Cool. Now the next change is Protoss category. We've got recall on the Nexus. The cooldown is increased from 85 to 130 seconds. Now this one was kind of surprising to me. The Warp Prism is the unit that's complained about all the time. Recall does get its fair share of complaints. It was nerfed once already, since it was moved from the Mothership Core to the Nexus because the Mothership Cores are moved. But the radius was reduced. It used to be basically you could just recall your entire army, and people were very frustrated that they were not punished for being out on the map at all. So now it's more just a part of your army, but now they're going to increase the cooldown so you can't do it as often. So what do you guys think about this? Is this good?
Yes, no, maybe so. I don't know. It's hard.
I think that is my favorite change of the whole list.
Oh, really? What is that?
I mean, like, probably, but I really don't like having the strategic recall on the Nexus. I mean, like, just the general design thing whereby, like, you're in operation, you can recall. I think that is kind of big, and you can keep doing it when the cooldown is kind of low. It's just too specific in a sense, and too strong overall.
Yeah,
I also
That's quite good. That's quite good. A few examples. I link it in the chat. Like the one with put. So basically, opponent's army is trapped, and all right, I think that is fine if it's like kind of like once or twice in the game. But I see some games recently, right? But I see that Protoss has been using it very frequently. So if you want to do a force a base trade, I just threaten you in a certain position itself, and you want to go there. They try to trade kind of equal value of the other base on the other side of the map, right? Most likely, Protoss come up on top because of the recall. Fact, certain tactical choices in the mid to late game. So I think increasing the time is kind of a good direction to go. In terms of exact time, up for debate, I would say.
Yeah, so 130 seconds is another one of those arbitrary choices, but the decision to make it longer, I think, makes sense. An important thing to note with this, too, is that the Nexus having the recall means that you don't tech into being able to recall well. It's just an innate Protoss thing. And one of the different aspects of StarCraft that would probably make Sun Tzu have a really big headache is the teleportation stuff in StarCraft. It doesn't really fit with the military command of needing to march from place to place, or even a plane like flying from place to place. You can, with Nidus, with recall, stuff like that, or battlecruiser, instantly teleport from one place to another. Sometimes there's a little bit of a cast time, but that does make balancing the game, I think, difficult and unwieldy in certain ways that don't conform to normal like space-time relations of needing to physically travel from place to place. So I think the Protoss is lore-wise supposed to be the most adept at teleportation and that kind of thing, so it makes sense. I mean, it's a distinctly Protoss advantage kind of a thing, but yeah, it does feel kind of frustrating when they'll go up, take a base, and then leave basically unpunished only to do it again.
I think Max brought up a really good point that it's interesting that it's an ability on the Nexus. Like I think if you look at Terran and Zerg, their macro mechanics are like they're interesting risk reward mechanics, right? Like as Terran, you can just continuously mule and never scan, but then you'll probably miss important scouting information. And as Zerg, you have this interesting decision making mechanic between creep and inject, which is less interesting now that everyone just masses queens, but the design is interesting at least. Whereas with Protoss, like you have Chrono Boost, which is good for your macro. Then you have this like almost unrelated ability in Recall of like, hey, I'm out of position, let me fix that. So I don't know. I don't feel like it presents as interesting a risk reward mechanic as like the other two races. And I also just don't think it's particularly well designed. I think you should be punished. There should be a less binary way of punishing people for being out of position.
Interestingly enough, I feel like Recall in the way that it is now, it only benefits people that play worse. Because I've been in multiple situations where I am quote unquote macroing too well to the point where I'm chrono boosting so much that I then am hurt by it because I don't have recall to, recall somewhere because there's a big drop or something, right? So like then there's the situations where you're then persuaded or you're encouraged to not chrono boost just so that you make sure you always have recall energy up at a certain time in case you need it for whatever reason. So like I don't know, that's just kind of an interesting thing to think about in relation to recall and how it's being used and how it fits in just the metagame right now. I don't really know a way to change that, to be honest. I feel like maybe an upgrade for it might be interesting, but I don't really know what exactly that would fix. But I do still think it's interesting though that this is such a like complaint, I guess, from the community. Yeah, that's also kind of like scans with mules as well. Someone in chat said, which I do agree with. But what was I gonna say? Like some of the things with recall anyway though is like it's been in the game for so long now that people do kind of revolve their play around it, like I was kind of saying, and especially since the meta right now revolves around a lot of 2-base pushes, especially in PvT, and PvT is the matchup that most people are using to fuel this recall hate. Like 2-base pushes are super common right now, and to deal with those 2-base pushes, a lot of times you'll need Blink Stalker squads out on the map to slow pushes down, and then you'll want your entire army to come in with it as well to engage before they're set up in the middle of the map. So a lot of the way that Protoss is playing in these earlier stages of the game is not really allowing them to split up their units effectively because they need all of their army together to deal with all of the army together from Terran or Zerg. And so it's become more of a thing for Protoss to just rely on having recall there to reposition because of the way that we're now kind of forced to having our large army together to deal with large armies together from the other races. And sometimes it can be difficult to know if they're splitting it up or not, and whatnot. But that's kind of my spiel on it. Whether or not I feel like this change is fine. It'll kind of hurt, obviously, as we just readjust to it, but I don't know. I'm curious if anyone has any response to what I just mentioned at all or not.
Well, one foundational principle of how Protoss works as a race is the units tend to be more powerful, more expensive, and slower if you compare them to, say, Zerg or Terran units on average. So recall is kind of a way of offsetting that weakness a little bit, it seems like. So that being in the game, I think kind of makes sense. There was one spreadsheet that was posted at some point. I don't remember when exactly this was or where it is, but they basically mapped out all the different units and all their different stats and then did some averages of the average movement speed of a Zerg unit, the average move speed of a Terran and a Protoss unit, average costs and damage and health values and stuff like that, which I felt was really informative for showing how the three races are unique. And I think that uniqueness is one of the most important things to maintain in the game, because otherwise you've basically just got different skins of the same thing and you're just kind of playing chess or checkers. which sounds pretty dull to me. Or mirror matchups, I guess you could say.
It's true.
That's a good
That's
point.
true.
All right, so now we get to the golden goose here. Yes, it is.
Oh shit.
The unit that has been memed about the most for the past ever. Warp prisms no longer start with the warp conduit passive ability. Warp-ins will take 11 seconds when not near a warp gate or nexus, up from 4. The Gravatic Drive upgrade now has additional functionality of granting warp prisms this ability, reducing the warp prism time to 4 seconds, which is what it used to be. So this is a massive one. There have been so many meme posts and stuff with the power of warp prism. It does create a lot of really interesting and flashy moments. People have talked a lot about the pickup range of it. Gemini, you're the Protoss. What's going on here?
Cracks knuckles, breaks neck. All right. All right. This is rough. Obviously, everyone's a little thrown off by it. Whether or not you're on one side or the other, some people are like, "Yay!" Some people are like, "I want to kill myself." But it's kind of rough, honestly, and it has some justifications behind it. I feel. The thing with this is that it affects so many different things. It affects not only all-ins, but it also affects macro plays, where macro Prism harass openers are across the board affected by this, because now you have 7 extra seconds that all of that harassment is hitting. It's hitting that later. So you have 7-second delay on all harassment. So Archon drops are the most standard way that you play a macro PvZ opener. Those are all hitting 7 seconds later. Those timings as to when all those are defended by Zerg, when you get your units out, when you cut drones, etc., when you position your queens, that's all very late in stone. To now have 7 extra seconds to get all those defenses set up and ready, the amount of the momentum you're trying to gain as a Protoss, it's going to be like cut off very hard because of that, I feel, versus Zergs that actually know what the hell they're doing. And this is going to be damn it, I'm looking at chat while I'm saying this is not good. I'm getting distracted. It's going to basically kill a lot of momentum that you're trying to get out of Protoss. DT Archon drop openers, they are also affected because the timing for spore and detection or whatever, very hammered down. You have 7 extra seconds to get all that ready. Stalker drop openings, which which revolve around you warping half of the units in across the map, those are all going to become terrible, etc. Then, not only that is that an issue, the extra time that you have warping in is extra time that the units themselves are vulnerable to units killing them. So you can very easily have like an 8 to 10 whatever Zergling hit squad go out on the map, snipe down just one Templar that's warping in right when they warp in, and all of a sudden that Archon drop is completely wasted. Like, there's no point in doing a 1 Archon drop with 1 High Templar just sitting around. Like, that's just so shitty. I mean, I could go longer about that, but I kind of did a tweet about it if you guys want to see more about that stuff. But to keep it relatively short, and then to give you guys some time to talk as well, I feel like it just overall changes a little bit too much for a mid-year patch and doesn't necessarily hit the problems that a lot of people were actually complaining about. I feel like people were complaining more about the juggling aspect than they were about the defender's advantage thing. And while I agree that defender's advantage should be limited, or it should be bolstered, and I feel like the design change in that regard is good, I don't feel like this is, I don't know, I feel like this is a tough one to swallow because of everything I just mentioned.
Well, it seems like from your perspective, it's more about the tempo of the matchup and how a lot of that is taken away from Protoss with this. When, from my perspective as a Zerg, the more frustrating thing is the Protoss's ability to be warping and stuff like 8 units at a time on your side of the map, which is pretty tough to deal with. I will say the DT Prism, and especially double DT Prism, is probably the most annoying thing that I face from Protoss. Just the speed that hits and needing not just units to defend, but also detection in all 3 of your bases at the same time is pretty tough. So my initial reaction to this Prism change was, yes, I'm going to have less of that. But yeah, Archon drops I think are a really cool like standard way for the ZVP meta to be set up. There's a lot of interaction between the Archons and the Queens and Lings and Roaches, and then you've got the creep maintenance and stuff like that. So yeah, finding a good balance there where Protoss can still pressure and take tempo if they want to, but also the bag of 2 base all-ins seems really massive right now in Protoss versus Zerg.
Yep.
So a lot of matches don't really go past 60 probes kind of for that reason of how hard you can hit across the map with huge warp-ins.
I'll let other people talk if they want to. Otherwise, I'll keep going.
So I think I generally agree with you, Gemini. I think your spiel establishes a pretty important point that the Warp Prism is very important in PvZ, and I would actually love to see Blizzard take on like a design patch that reduces the importance of the Warp Prism and tries to find a way for it to not be this unit where like it's so critical to your ability to win, and if you lose it by mistake, you basically lose. It's not that extreme, but I think it would be good to reduce the overall importance of the unit. I think my issue with this change is that I think it addresses the symptom of the problem right now instead of the root cause. To me, like going back as far back as the Morrow proxies of 2018, I think the problem with Protoss is that they're just slightly ahead in terms of economy. And this is the result of many different things, many of the buffs they've received, the nerfs that other races have received. I would much rather we not go forward with like a risky Prism change and a risky stim pack change, and instead just do something a little bit safer, like just slightly dial back Chrono Boost. I think that would move the game in the right direction for like a mid-year balance update. And then maybe after, when we do the design patch after BlizzCon, we can do riskier changes. That's my perspective.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel like that's fine. People might say safe is boring, like in chat, but for a mid-year patch, I think that's acceptable, especially considering a lot of these players' livelihoods are on the line in that regard. But of course, you can make the meme that the non-Protoss players have already felt that, so even it out. But that's a whole other fucking argument. But yeah, I still agree that I like the design change of trying to bolster defender's advantage. I really do like that. I agree that I feel being able to warp in an entire army of units on the other side of the map at any point in time is kind of against RTS standards. It just feels not correct. Nidus. But I feel like you can change it in a way that I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I can't think of a change right off my head, but I feel like there's a way that it could be changed that doesn't also completely neuter absolutely everything opening-wise that Protoss does. And if you do want to do it, I think we have to wait until a little bit later, not in the middle of the year, personally.
I want to go back to some of the things that both of you are saying. So I think all of us can agree that big changes should not be kind of the mid-year changes, right? And rather kind of like the yearly end of the year proposal, right? There's more room for redesign, and it's because people's careers on the line. And I think most of us agree on that. But what we kind of disagree, and that's where this comes from, is what they consider as big versus small, and what some other people consider big versus small. So one end, you can argue that changing economy, right, is a big change. Everything is snowballs down to everything. It changes everything, right? And as for like say rock isn't change, I mean this looks big, obviously. That is more of a relatively minor change, in a sense, relatively. So it really depends on how you see it. What is big and what is small. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a good
I feel
point.
like the Prism thing is big, but go ahead, Neuro.
The one aspect of how StarCraft is made as a video game is that it's also tuned to be an exciting spectator sport as well, which I think in a way makes it less of a pure, like, what is the most fair RTS you can physically have, they intentionally incentivize certain tools to be strong to create fun and interactive moments that happen on the front foot. Because if they make Defender's Advantage too strong, you'll get a bunch of really slow, lumbering, split map scenarios, kind of like when Swarm Host was a problem in Heart of the Swarm. And games get really long, and there are periods of sometimes 10 minutes where nothing is really happening that's exciting for the viewer. So the game is made in such a way that people can create big moments, and I think they intend to keep it that way, and it should stay that way just to drive interest for watching StarCraft. So the Warp Prism is one of those things that you can really showcase a lot of skill, and a lot of those really exciting, memorable moments are those juggle moves that people do with the Prism. Yeah, it can be frustrating to play against, but basically any aggressive tool is going to be frustrating to play against. That's a big part of what makes StarCraft.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Zergs have no defender's advantage. What is creep spread?
Something else that I feel is worth talking about just a little bit. What is the overall thought of doing a -1 pickup range and -1 queen range change?
But as a Terran, yes. Thanks.
Like, do queens really need, what is it, 9, 8 range? What is it now? 10, a million? What is it? No, seriously, I'm not sure.
Well, the Liberator was the problem for that.
Yeah, I know the Liberator meme. Like, do you actually need that much range for Liberator defense? Is it necessary still?
Yeah, you can't hit Liberators with Liberator range with Queens anyway. And if Queens didn't have that much range, then Liberators without range could hassle you. It's just one of the things where Zerg doesn't have multiple anti-air options early on. It's not until Hydra and Spire that you get stuff like that. You can make Ravagers, I guess, to bile range Liberators, but yeah, that was another big phase in balance that has been figured out over Legacy of the Void for the most part. Basically, with the introduction of Liberators, Liberator range, battlecruisers, stuff like that, Zergs have become more and more reliant on making a bunch of queens, and a big change from Heart of the Swarm to Legacy of the Void is we get 3 larvae per inject instead of 4 larvae. So that makes using your larva into units less desirable than making a queen and more drones.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, what else can we do if we don't have the
Yeah,
queen?
yeah.
Like, what else
For
do
sure.
we build?
And I mean, I feel like that's just like I think that's a similar discussion to have with just like, the whole warp gate like technology thing in general, where it's like, do we really need? Is there a way to make it so that way Zerg does not need to rely on a bajillion queens in the early game? Can we make it so that the Zerg's macro mechanic is their macro mechanic and not their early game army kind of a thing? I feel like that's a whole other discussion that could be quite difficult to answer, and the maps also play a huge part in that, because you could very easily pull off that smaller queen range nerf to deal with Liberators and stuff, or to deal with Warp Prisms or whatever, if maps are changed so that way there's not as many abusable Liberator spots and stuff like that. But that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on map design, which ends up being a really big impact on balance as well. Yeah. For stuff like teleportation mechanics, because you could say that the longer the rush distance, the more impactful a teleportation device ends up being. So Nidus ignores the distance you travel, Battlecruiser does, and Warp Prism does, and Recall as well. So if we have bigger maps, then those things are going to look stronger, whereas smaller maps, they're not going to be as impactful as just walking across. And presently, it seems like the maps are fairly similarly sized. It's not like drastically different where some are huge and some are tiny. We do have new map mechanics now with the slowing fields and the mineral walls. And what else is there? There's some different vision blockers now. Oh, the Rich Vespine is the other one that was put in this time. So all that's pretty fun. I was kind of joking about how these changes have been going. Are we eventually going to have like speed jump ramps for our units if they keep adding these different map features where you can run and jump over something, kind of like a Reaper
That'd
leap?
be amazing. We're Mario Kart now, boys.
Yeah.
Do we have little fucking minerals and Vespine geyser things to collect in the air if you jump over them? Oh, that'd be great.
Creative.
That's funny.
Yeah, on Kairos Junction, there are some little containers of minerals that are around, and I was like, why can't we collect these? I want to collect these.
Like the campaign.
Yeah.
I think that maps are. I was really surprised when I read the patch notes that they didn't bring up the map pool. Like, I think the map pool is probably one of the most important factors in balance. It doesn't get talked about enough in balance updates. Like, I remember when Mech Depot was in the map pool. Like, I just knew when I saw that go into the map pool that Zerg would win BlizzCon because it's just like this massive, heavily Zerg favored map. And I feel that like one technique the developers should at least consider is that like legacy map design has really emphasized the third base being very close to your natural and your main. And the reason for that was that because at the beginning of Legacy and for most of the game's history, Protoss has been very immobile and has really struggled to defend that third base early in the game. And I think a lot of the recent changes, especially around shield batteries, have changed that. And I wonder whether, like, just not even do a patch, just move out the third base 5 cells and see what happens. I think that's a tool worth considering.
I disagree on it. I feel like shield batteries and stuff have helped, but not to the point where like third bases can just be a fucking field goal away or a football field away or whatever. Like there's still like the transition time between going from a natural to a third walk distance wise is like you still need it fairly close. It can be pretty easy to abuse a Protoss player that's getting split up too much on very low unit count. Especially if we're nerfing war prisms to make it much less difficult or much more difficult and much less streamlined to micro stuff around and reposition and stuff.
How would you feel about, instead of like changing all the maps, just introduce like one map like Catalina where Protoss it's not favored against Protoss, kind of forcing them to always veto that in tournaments, and then kind of opening the map pool up to give the other races more room. How would you feel about a change like that?
I'm in general very against this map is good against this race like very clearly thing. I feel like it. I mean this is the debate of do you want creative or standard maps, and I'm always of the opinion that we should have as many standard maps as possible to make it so that any race can potentially play any of the maps that are in a pool, so that way there's not the obvious vetoes, because then you just get the same 3 maps, same 5 maps, and play it every single time. I would rather them to be as flexible and versatile as possible, so that way you have a much larger variety in how many, holy shit, these subs, and how many maps can be played in any series. And it's like forcing it so that way one person always vetoes X map because they just play the race and that map is bad for that race. Like, that's not interesting in my opinion. That's just dumb, to be blunt.
Well, this is a point of, I think, debate between spectators and regular players and pro players since the beginning of StarCraft. Because a pro player wants as much consistency as possible so that they can practice, and their practice will apply to all the different landscapes and they have a good shot of winning. So stuff that they successfully pushed through was pro players really didn't like 4 spawn maps, because some of the time people would just take a risk that ends up being greater than 50% chance of succeeding. They'll go for something like in ZVZ 13 gas 12 pool speedling cheese, and you can just basically pick up a free win in a lot of scenarios with that. And that's really unfun and frustrating for pro players who, like Gemini was saying earlier, it's their livelihood and their job, and that's a kind of annoying way to lose money. But yeah, having more consistent maps is interesting. One thing that could be expanded a little bit is the way that they do the official ladder maps. Someone mentioned a while back, what if you had more total maps but also more vetoes? Would that be an interesting change that would increase variety? It would allow creative players to get into series where they could have those unorthodox games in different situations, while also not really taking away the standard macro games from the pro players who want those.
That is interesting. I feel like I would not be against that, only because it would make my wall-off guides much more lucrative. But
He's like, oh, I'm gonna be rich.
Even from a player perspective of just having more variety, I feel like that would definitely be interesting to shake it up a lot, and also to allow the map making community in general to just have more options and more opportunities to push out their maps and have them played in a larger setting.
I think the only concern I have is it might be too much cognitive load for lower league players. So I don't know if like 7 is a magic number, maybe 9 would be enough, but at a certain point, I think lower league players would just start getting too confused.
Yeah, and that's the offs. That was the whole lucrative game as well. I feel like there's a very big balance that you have to put there. There's like a huge plus and down to every single thing with maps. It's so hard to get the right thing.
Well, I was saying the idea was that you have... Sorry. You have the ability to veto 5. So you have 5 remaining maps, the same as it is now. But you just start with more total. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about like the number of maps. I think brownbear bring a really good point, being cognitively loading. So 7 is really very close to the magic number, backed by research. Choice overload is the magic number is 6, which is 7 is pretty fair. Things start to change how you perceive choices, how you perceive what you want to remove from the choice set. It's kind of close to the magic number itself. We should decrease the number of veto you can have. So it kind of goes back to the idea of having more maps and more veto, but this time we kind of keep the same number of maps to 7. Let people veto fewer maps. So maybe 2 maps, for example, right? Map changes, right? Like the newer maps are this slow. The map in the middle map and inside the map, if I can slow things when you walk past it. I think Blizzard's really opened to new ideas to kind of like, being more exploratory to maps, and they kind of go along the same path as what Gemini is saying, what pro gamers like in terms of being more predictive and stuff. So I'm not sure what next round maps gonna look like, because this time around the more maps, right, generally giveaway. And more specifically, it's more about how they apply rather than the actual feature itself. So I think the next set of map, we kind of have a clear picture of what Blizzard want to take in terms of how they want to kind of lean towards in terms of map design. For play, kind of more standard play, or is it more towards the, let's have some more flavor to our play?
Yeah, the theory of map choice, I think, is a thing that has evolved over time. If you compare current Legacy of the Void maps to Wings of Liberty maps, I think that setup has improved. We do get some nostalgia of the old maps and stuff, but they are weird and wonky to play on, and it feels like you get into some very odd and unfair and annoying scenarios with the older maps. But yeah, that is a question that I think isn't talked about as much as balance, but it might be even more impactful than changing the units in a lot of scenarios, as we were talking about, where the game is in a pretty good state. Mixing around the map sum would be pretty interesting. Another aspect, too, that might allow us to have our cake and eat it is, how Hearthstone has a ranked mode and then they have a wild mode, where wild is like a bunch of stuff that's no longer in play, maybe it's kind of imbalanced or whatever. You could have like a wild ladder for StarCraft that had a bunch of throwback maps and things like this that were in circulation at some point. Maybe they're pretty clearly favoring one race over another, so people can experience that variety if they want to, but it doesn't mess with the pro players' practice and their performance in the tournaments.
I feel like it'll just never get used, just like the test balance, or the balance test queue never gets used.
Yeah, that's what I believe. Orton is saying there aren't enough players to do that mode. We did run into that problem with Archon mode. There wasn't enough demand for it, so the queue times are really long if you get your rank up higher.
Mm.
Well, cool. We got to cover... Go ahead.
If we're good on maps, can we return to Prism momentarily?
We can have another pass at Prism. All right.
Sick.
Gemini's coming back for another swing.
All right, here we go. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm curious though, because like I feel like I just kind of want to be clear. Do we all kind of agree that the juggling aspect of prisms is more the issue than the warp-ins, or am I disconnected in that regard?
I don't know about issue because it's really PogChamp to see it happen.
Yeah, but people complain about it. Like, there's way more whining, I feel, about the cannon rush into battery immortal prism, and all-ins being able to juggle shit nonstop, and it's impossible to attack into them, or max roach armies not being able to move through 8 immortals being microed incessantly on the back end or whatever, right? Like, I feel like that is the thing that is gaining a lot more traction in the balance. There's the whole, hello Blizzard, hello meme from a Home Story Cup of all the Zergs doing that shit when Zest is barely keeping himself alive with a Prism Immortal versus a maxed army, and then he loses the Prism and thus the game immediately afterwards. So like, this change does literally nothing to solve any of that. So like, is that what the community wants? Is that what we're going for, or is the juggle thing more important to change? Because we're still gonna see people complain.
I would
even
count
what this thing can put in.
For my thoughts, I would count this just as a personal opinion because I'm not playing at the highest level, which also means I'm not playing it against the Protosses who are at the highest level, excluding maybe the European player who decided to smurf on NAGM for a while. But aside from that, the juggling aspect isn't really what frustrates me. It's the speed that a lot of the huge gateway pushes are hitting me. So the warp time change, I think, looks better to me than the pickup range. I mean, I have queens, so usually I'm focusing on my queens trying to right click the prism anyway. That's kind of the interaction there. So Protoss is juggling the prism. I'm trying to use my queens to hit the prism. And to me, that's like a fun sort of interaction. The thing that is annoying to me is the speed the DTs are on my base, and like the double prism harass and kind of stuff like that is kind of annoying. But yeah, that's just an opinion.
For sure.
For me, it's kind of a question of design versus balance. Like, I agree that maybe the design is questionable. I'm not sure. I actually agree with Neuro that it's fun to watch. I think it's a cool mechanic. I think it's something that makes Protoss unique. The issue for me with the War Prism changes, I don't necessarily think it's imbalanced. I think the core problem with imbalance is economy, and I think I would rather developers slightly dial that back.
Yeah, for the difference in worker production for the races, just to give people a general assessment of how the economy works, Terran gets a spike every time they drop a mule, which means that usually in the 4 to 6 minute range, they tend to do some kind of pressure. I don't know about TVP or TVT, but against Zerg, they usually leverage that extra mineral income into Hellions or Marines or Liberator, some kind of harassment opening. And then Protoss has Chrono Boost, which means that they tend to have more workers in the 1 to 2 base stage than both Zerg and Terran. But Zerg shoots ahead once they have 3 bases injected and they're going up to 70 or so workers. That's when they really get a big lead. So the way the economies progress is different, and that's based on the macro mechanics of the 3 races between Chrono Boost, Mule, and Inject.
I think comparing the 3 races in terms of economy design is a good public good. So I lean towards brownbear's opinion regarding the root of the problem being the economy. So if you look at PvZ and PvZ, right, it's really hard to kind of find how the economy works because of lava system, right? It's not that linear. But when you look at Terran versus Protoss, right, so you move the Zerg from the equation, right? One of the things that many people have pointed out is the Protoss taking a third, and the way the minion cards generate the third, right? At the point of time, it seems like ahead, economically speaking. I think that's one Reddit post that kind of looked at data, quantify it, and I would say, right, statistically speaking, right, that there's some weaknesses to the analysis, but that's not a key point. But the one thing I want to talk about is what Brother is saying, right? The root of the problem that quite a lot of people have identified economy, and specifically is the Protoss. So, like, do you want to buff other races' economy, or do you want to nerf Protoss economy? Something that really should be looked at rather than, like, just kill off like rock prism in a certain way.
Yeah, I think that relates to Gemini's point he made earlier that if you tune back Chrono Boost a little bit, it might fix all of these things at once. Or if they have a little bit less economy compared to Terran and Zerg, like you're saying, then maybe these Warp Prism timings wouldn't be as early, as strong, or as fast. So it would give more counterplay without necessarily removing a lot of the responsiveness and flexibility of the Prism. Just from a gameplay perspective, one of the things that I really love about StarCraft is how fast and responsive the different units and interactions feel. So for a warp time change to go from 4 seconds to 11 seconds, 11 seconds in StarCraft, that feels like forever. It's a really long amount of time to watch your units warping it. Mm-hmm. So having stuff still feel really fast and snappy, I think, is something that should be prioritized. It's a very quick and responsive game. And changing maybe the strength of Chrono Boost wouldn't make the game feel less responsive. It would tune back that 2-base Protoss power spike a little bit, but it wouldn't really remove that sick micro potential and, as Gemini was saying earlier, the tempo of Protoss' ability to take initiative earlier on.
I agree.
Well, cool. So we covered all of the different notes. Do we have any additional thoughts, or do we want to read Twitch chat a little bit, see if we want to answer any of those questions?
While we're waiting for any questions to come in, I could do a very quick spiel on PvP, because I know I'm the only Protoss here, so I can just quickly... I saw someone ask about how the Warp Prism change affects PvP, so I'll quickly give a little thing of... Basically, it makes all-ins a little bit more... you have to commit more to them, because you don't have a Prism. If you're doing the 3-gate Stalker Robo stuff, you can't more easily warp in extra Stalkers and stuff like that, so that build is literally dead. The Proxy Immortal becomes worse because you don't have a Prism to easily warp in. It's a longer warp in, so that's more difficult. So basically, you need to put a gateway with your pylon to be able to do that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff is definitely hindered. It also makes just attacking in general much harder, because the defender's advantage of shield batteries plus a shorter warp in really offsets a long warp in, because shield battery is already a pretty good defender's advantage in PvP. Combining that with a much longer warp in time is really huge. The PvP fights literally swing based off of the warp ins, so that's actually really big, and it's really gonna force PvP into a more tech oriented longer matchup, I presume. With a lot, I feel like Blink Disruptor could come back and be pretty strong, but I feel like you can get a lot more tech in longer games based off of this change, personally.
What you would say is a positive?
I don't know, to be honest, because I've always liked shorter PvPs, to be real. That may or may not be a hot take, but I actually quite like the very snappy, quick, fast-paced mind game aspect of early game PvP, and I've always been kind of a proponent of the early game PvP stuff, even way back to Wings of Liberty, Heart of the Swarm. I actually quite liked those styles. So I personally, I don't know, but anything to get rid of this ridiculous proxy meta that's happening right now, like it's actually a complete clusterfuck.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things. Someone linked a screenshot of that one of those in-game help tips whenever you're at the loading screen and says, Terran can build their structures at any spot on the map. And it's like, oh yes. I build everything all over the place.
Now Protoss can too.
So we had a couple questions. Someone was asking, could there be a change to Protoss or Terran to help Terran take a quick third? There's a variety of Protoss openers that can shut that down. So what do you nerf or buff to allow that to happen? The Chrono Boost change would mean that Protoss can't take their third as fast. Max was saying the question of should you be buffing Protoss or Terran economy, Terran or Zerg economy to match Protoss, or should you tune back Protoss economy? That's kind of an open question of what Blizzard wants to do in terms of making everyone stronger or tuning everyone back to a similar level. It's tough to say.
Mm-hmm. I don't have any initial, like I'm actually quite bad at theory crafting, to be honest, which is hilarious given the context of this discussion we're having. But like on the very huge macro, like the economy stuff, like I have a hard time being able to tell what a change would actually impact. So like I honestly don't know. I feel like that's such a difficult thing to be able to change personally. I'd have to like actually really think about that for longer. But the Chrono Boost change is definitely the thing that first would come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's a question of...
I'm sorry.
Oh, good.
No, you go ahead.
So many Canadians we got
Sure,
here. I thought we were all from different countries.
I take it. All right. So regarding the econ thing, right? I talked to quite a number of people, and one of the things that most, should I say, safe option that I heard of is kind of working on the orbital command. Say that I don't mean improving meal, for example. One way to do it is to allow SCV production during upgrade. Reason behind it is, first, number one, it does not negatively affect late game because Terran spam orbital command, right? So if you say I decrease the cost for orbital command research, it affects late game. If you say I decrease the time of your upgrade, it affects late game, right? But late game, we don't build them in SCV when you spam orbital command, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is it is more quantifiable. All this econ talk is kind of like the second base, the third base, right? So there'll be two orbital command that get affected in this sense, or maybe the first one you will count it in, right? And you can tell by the timing of it how many SCVs can be built. Kind of tell, right? Like quantify it and plot it out as a model, right? Economy you're gonna have. So that is a good starting point. You know, let's say manage some of the lava changes, right? Whereby it affects a lot of strategy, I think, to try to build units. So in my opinion, that's one of the best proposals that I heard from different people. What do you guys think?
So to clarify that, you're talking about whenever someone is morphing a command center into an orbital command or planetary fortress, they can build SCVs at the same time, right? Is that what you're talking about?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, that's what he's talking about. So that would be, like you're saying, a quantifiable change where you can have a few more SCVs in the stage when you're making your main into an orbital, the stage where you're making your natural into an orbital, and your third into a planetary or an orbital, and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that would be an alternative to changing Chrono Boost, where Terran can keep pace with Protoss a little bit better by a couple workers. I like the idea because it seems like it's a fairly small change that has a fixed size. So it's not something that would spiral too much. There is a little bit of a snowball effect in StarCraft in terms of if you have more economy, that means you can expand faster and thus increase your economy even faster by making workers. But yeah, that doesn't seem too unreasonable to me.
Yeah, like that's actually a very interesting change. I would be very for having them test that out.
Yeah, because Zerg can make stuff out of their lair as it's morphing in their hive, so it kind of seems similar to that.
Let's know the upgrade time for orbital command compared to the SCV production. How many SCV can be produced if you allow this change to go through? You guys know
So,
that?
oh,
Are you asking what
No,
the
so
like,
basically
how
I'm
much
asking,
we'll
right?
get?
Assuming this change goes through, right? For orbital command, for example, how many more SCV can be produced during the period of time?
Do you know?
Is this a quiz? It's one?
It's just one.
It's one. Oh.
Ooh. So
Because
Terrans would
the
have like...
upgrade time
So
is...
did he just debate us all that this is actually not a good change, or are you gonna reveal
just
that this
kidding.
actually is good or something?
No, I think he's saying that it is good, but it's not a huge change. It's a small
Okay,
change.
so it's like okay, it's like a. It sounds like it
Nah,
might
just
actually
kidding.
be
It's not one.
insane.
It's not one. It's not one. Just kidding. It's
Is
not
it
one.
2? I mean, it's not 5, is it?
So basically the command time, just to be very clear.
I still don't know what the right answer is. I'm failing the quiz. Teacher, please. I just want to know the answer.
That'd be your homework.
Fuck. Well, you didn't teach me the material. How am I supposed to do the homework? This is a
Welcome
sudden
to
thing.
university,
You're gonna have
boy.
to... You're gonna have to go to the public library and ask the librarian where the book is on how long it takes to make an SCV and an orbital command.
Fuck.
And then for your bonus credit question, you have to figure that out for a planetary fortress as well, okay?
I mean, in all seriousness, right? Like, I don't think it's that straightforward how many SC we can build, like what Neuro was saying, because when you have early game economy advantage, right, it's kind of snowball down to your next one. Example, right? If the natural can start from the first command center anyway, so I can get my addition SCV a bit quicker. Then the second command center be a bit quicker. I get 400 mineral quicker, right? Then at the same time, it becomes snowball down to the third one, right? So it goes back to the earlier suggestion that, like, Terran, what changes can Prism make, right? To allow Terran to take the third base earlier to match up with the Protoss. So I think this itself is one of the options. It kind of snowball down to the third one, right? And I think Dean kind of talked about this as well. He was saying, right, by design and mechanics, when you build buildings, the workers are not mining. When you do this minor increase of workers, right, time, it may be the difference may be smaller than what some people are saying, because I think some map, I can't remember who did it in a paper or something. So the of an SCV compared to other workers is slightly smaller because of the requirement for SCV to be not mining when they build stuff. So this may be a safe change to go forward.
Yeah, I like the idea. The Zerg versus Terran as a matchup, to me, has felt pretty good for a while now. It feels like it's usually the person who plays better who comes out ahead. But, yeah, it seems like a fairly modest change. And StarCraft is in a pretty good spot right now. Legacy of the Void has been out for a while, so a lot of those really big glaring mistakes have been fixed for the most part. Now it's just trying to make the game as good as it can possibly be. And StarCraft, with its legacy from StarCraft 1 into StarCraft 2, is, in my opinion, going the way of chess, where it basically defeated all the other RTS games that had a chance of being the competitive RTS. And it's kind of getting into that realm of if you want to play RTS, it is StarCraft. Like, that is how you compete in RTS. And I think Blizzard knows this, and that's part of why they continue to invest in the product for how old it is. It's just that kind of classic category of it is the game in this sphere. If you want to play a fast-paced 1-versus-1 game, it's StarCraft, which is pretty awesome to think about. Cool. Do we have any final or closing thoughts? It's been a good duration. I think we got to tackle most of the stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think overall, patch good, Prism nerf bad. I feel like there's other ways we could do it, potentially, you know, making the warp in time even just like 7 seconds, 8 seconds. Like, why does it have to be 11? I don't know. I feel like it decreases a lot while still going in a right direction. So I don't personally know at the moment off my head what a better thing to do to bolster defender's advantage would be while not cutting build order diversity, but I don't know. Overall, patch seems good. I would still be very interested to see what that second round of changes they still have as well. I'm curious what that would be, so I feel like having them say that would be very beneficial so that at least the community could choose which they feel are the better changes or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall it's great that they wrote such a detailed post. I like the discussion of design philosophy. I guess I disagree a little bit in the sense that I don't agree with most of the big changes in the patch. I think it would be better to go another way. But I did appreciate the detail in the post. Thought it was nice.
I would say I expect this warp prism change to not go through. I think that's a safe bet. But as for some of the things we mentioned, right, like what brownbear is saying, this is not problem, instead it's the economy. And I highly doubt that Blizzard is going to make a U-turn to like saying, right, this is not exactly what we should be stacking on, and we should look at the economy, right? So I think this is the part that go down. We kind of want to do some changes to the specific units that has been talked the most. And I believe there'll be more fine-tuning in the second round, as for example, Rock Prism, like maybe not the exact numbers that we see right now. I don't think they're going to do other changes to Rock Prism, like, you know, the pickup range and stuff, because Blizzard have a long history in terms of like wanting to keep things for fuel ships, showcase different place level. So I think Rock Prism pickup, right, is one of the good example of it. And so I think warp-in timing requires some adjustment. So probably at year end, right, like what brownbear is saying, maybe you should really look at the econ, some of the power away from Warp Prism and buff some other Protoss stuff to balance it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there does tend to be a pattern of make a big change and then tune it back in a lot of these updates we've had. So we shouldn't necessarily expect that all of these changes are going to go in exactly as they did in the live game. There's going to be the testing stage. It's possible that none of these get pushed through. It's possible that all of them get pushed through. So we'll kind of wait and see what happens. But it's I've joked about it like it's a big stadium, and you've got 3 sections, Terran, Zerg, and Protoss. And Blizzard will point to a section and say, Terran players, how upset are you about the current state of the game? And they're like, bah, I hate it! All right, Zerg players, how upset are you at the state of the game? Bah, stupid War Prism! Protoss players, how upset are you at the state of the game? They're like, all right, we're going to nerf Protoss then. So everyone can do their part. They can make their meme posts and complain to the community, and Blizzard notices, they read stuff. They're in the community too. So, yep, looking forward to where the game is going. I'm happy about StarCraft 2 right now. I think it's exciting and fresh and interesting and oftentimes upsetting, but that's part of RTS. People trying to kill you with units. Yeah, thanks very much, everyone, for being a part of this discussion. I'll hit the guests command again. Be sure to give them follows on all of those different fancy links. And then there's also the articles that have been written by brownbear and Max. And cool. And perhaps we could do one of these again when they do the next round of stuff, if you guys are up for it.
Sick. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Be nice.
absolutely. Thanks for hosting.
Definitely.
Good stuff, everybody. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you for your time and your thoughts. And I will see you in the next meme post on the StarCraft subreddit.
Adios.
Take care.
See you later, guys.
Nice. Nice. That was fun. What'd you think?